Well, I am very pleased to be with you today, and I want to thank you. This is a great audience and a great opportunity to talk to you about something that I have a huge passion for, and that is our United States military and protecting our homeland. I appreciate the introduction. Thank you very much. It is an honor to be with you today, truly. So. Many times when I'm out and about, everybody will ask, Joni, you don't look like a military person. What led you into the military? And so I just want to go back a few years and explain how I ended up in the United States military. I've served both in the Army Reserves and then transitioned into the Iowa Army National Guard. But growing up on a farm in southwest Iowa, the one thing that was really, really hammered into me by my parents was to work very hard. So we did. Iowans, Midwesterners tend to be very self-reliant, and we grew up, my brother, my sister, and I, working very hard on that farm. And I had a lot of pride in that. But having that agricultural background, of course, I went to Iowa State University, and I attended an agricultural exchange to Ukraine in the summer of 1989. That was while it was still part of the Soviet Union. So there were 18 Iowa students. We went to Ukraine, stayed on a farm, each of us in individual homes across this collective. And the family that I stayed with had no running water. They didn't have a refrigerator. They didn't have a car. They did have a bicycle, which all of the family members shared. That's what they used to get around the collective. And it was an interesting experience because remember, it was 1989, and I'm pumping water from the well every morning and using an outhouse behind the chicken coop. So we farmed during the day. We went out. At that time, it was kind of a tomato production time of year. So we would go out onto the farm, very large farm, community collective, pick the tomatoes. They were still farming using horses and wagons, 1989. And in the evening, the whole community would come together at their community center, and it was an agricultural exchange. We were supposed to be sharing ideas about their type of agriculture and how we farmed on our home farms back in Iowa. But the questions that were directed to those of us American students, the one thing that impressed me so much was they said, what is it like to be an American? What is it like to travel anywhere you want without asking somebody's permission? What is it like to have a telephone that you can call your family or your friends any time of the day? On the collective, there was one telephone, and that was the collective manager's phone. And he would want to know who you were calling, why you were calling them, and how long you're going to be on the phone. So they had a lot of questions that made a big impression on me. And I've always been a proud American, but I decided I need to give back to my country. And I grew up in a family that didn't have a whole heck of a lot, but I had my service. So I returned back to Iowa State University, and I joined Army ROTC. I was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the Army Reserves. I was an engineer officer for many years. I had met my husband, who was an active duty soldier, and when he retired, we returned back to Iowa, and I went into the Transportation Corps at that point then, and that's when I was deployed to Iraq. I spent a year overseas from 2003 to 2004 and did lead a company of transporters, mechanics, truck drivers, administrative clerks, and so forth. And it was a very tough year. But in that year, I did learn a lot about our nation's military with all of the different folks that I worked with, and I absolutely loved it. I served along some of the best servicemen and women that America has to offer. And I'll share a couple stories with you here in just a moment. But what I saw while I was over there driving through Iraq, I really witnessed firsthand some of those threats to those men and women and how very dangerous it can be. We talk about the American military being marginal, and I would say that the men and women that serve you are fantastic. They are fantastic. They are the best of the best anywhere. But we have a lot of work to do when it comes to training and equipping them with the proper equipment. So the first thing I'll share with you is doing convoys through that region. When I was assigned to do my first convoy up into Iraq, we had just gotten into theater, had just started receiving our equipment off of the ships as it was being shipped into that region. We were assigned to go up into Iraq and drop supplies off at Baghdad International Airport. We did not have maps. No maps. No maps to get to Iraq. No maps to know what the road network was. I mean, that's how poorly equipped we were throughout the region. So what I had to do, there was a Tennessee National Guard unit in the next camp over. They didn't have maps either. But what they did have, they had a hand-drawn strip map. And their company commander came over and sat down with me, and that's what we used, a hand-drawn strip map from his hand-drawn strip map. And then we added our own geographical features along the way as we drove up into Iraq. So that's how we navigated, folks. That was really tough. So there's a lot of issues. We have big picture stuff going on at the top. We've got great leaders up here. But what I try and emphasize in my role as a United States Senator with our military leadership is that that's great. You have to have strategy up here. But when you're looking at that strategy up here as a 4-star or 3-star general, you need to remember that there are privates and specialists and young sergeants down at the very bottom level who are trying to execute this strategy in an operational manner. And you must make sure that you are providing them with the best equipment and the best training possible, because we want those young privates, those specialists, those sergeants, not only to accomplish the mission that they are setting forward, but that they're going to return home safely to their families as well. They can't forget that. And that's where my experience serving at that lowest level in the United States military has been so very important to me, is because I can see the issues and the disconnect between this level up here and the folks that are actually doing our business down here on the ground. So that's one little story. But I'll tell you, any mission that we were assigned, we were able to accomplish just by sheer determination. You know, a lot of folks would say, hey, give me a map, give me a GPS system, or I'm not going. But we knew it was imperative that we get the ammo, that we get the MREs, you know, the meals ready to eat, that we get the equipment up into Iraq to make sure the warfighter can do their job too. So that's imperative. So we did that. I recently did retire from the Iowa National Guard. I just retired last November, at the end of November, with 23 plus years of service. And it has been just an absolute honor to serve in that capacity. But now I have found another way that I can serve our military men and women in the United States Senate. So I'm very, very glad to be there. Let's talk about a few things that are going on in the Senate, in Congress right now, as we work through a lot of issues that we have globally. The first, of course, anytime you think about threats that we have out there, ISIS, it always comes to the top. We have a lot of threats out there, but the one that tends to touch us here in the homeland, ISIS. We see a lot of terrorist actions throughout our country. And we know from the FBI director that there are active threats in all 50 of our states. So what do we need to counter terrorism in the United States? Well, bottom line, we have to defeat it. We have to defeat it. And this administration has been so intent on containing it, on degrading ISIS capabilities. But we can't just do that. That's not working. That's not working. ISIS continues to spread. We see it in Africa right now, and we see it moving into Afghanistan as well. So we are not doing a very good job. So counter ISIS campaign. We really have to do that. And part of that is coming up with a comprehensive strategy which will allow us to engage ISIS no matter where they are. If it's Iraq, if it's Syria, if it's Afghanistan, if we need to go after them in Africa, then our forces should have the ability to do that. And thank you. Yeah, thank you. So we should not be hamstrung by saying you can only go after ISIS if they are in Iraq. We have to be able to take the fight to them no matter where they are. So I have been working on an authorization for the use of military force, which would allow us to do that. So if we know that we have known terrorist cells of ISIS, wherever they are, we can engage them and destroy them. So we need to do that. Part of that effort is including the allies that we have, because we know the United States cannot do this on their own. So diplomatically, we need to engage these other countries that are willing to fight. And one of those groups is the Kurdish Peshmerga. They are in Iraq, and they are proven fighters. Now, they won't deploy to Africa, or they won't, maybe go into other areas. But what they will do is hold their ground. They will push ISIS back, and they certainly will destroy them. They have done that quite effectively. So I have proposed a bill. We have been working on this quite heavily, but directly arming the Kurdish Peshmerga from the United States to the Peshmerga. Recently, we have seen where supplies will go through Baghdad. That's the way it's established. They'll be distributed in Baghdad to all the different groups. Well, my concern is that the Kurdish Peshmerga, they are not getting all the ammunition. They're not getting all of the small arms that is intended to go to them. It goes to other groups, they're fighting ISIS. But the Peshmerga, they are the proven fighters. So we want to make sure that we are supporting them. They also provide a safe haven in Kurdistan for about 2 million refugees. 2 million refugees in Kurdistan. Many of them Christians, many of them ethnic minorities. But they do that for us. Now, if more countries would do that throughout the Middle East, we would see less of a refugee crisis coming westward. But the Kurds have been willing to do that, and they've done it quite well. So anything that we can do to assist Kurdistan, the Kurdish Peshmerga, I think that is something that we need to be behind. So, I'll continue pushing that initiative and making sure that we are gaining support on that. I think many of my Democratic colleagues, actually, they're starting to see that, yes, we do need to engage our partners in that region more than we've done in the past. And so we'll just keep moving forward. Now, I also want to address debt and waste, because we've heard it all before about all of the waste that is in the United States military or across DOD, and I will agree with that. I am very, very passionate about our military and making sure that we are well funded, again, that we are training and equipping our young men and women to the best of our ability. We want them to maintain that qualitative military edge over our adversaries. But we have to look inward, too, at the waste that we have throughout the department. And I'll give you a quick example of what I witnessed firsthand many, many years ago when I was in Kuwait. We stayed at a camp in Kuwait. We had permanent residents there in canvas tents. We lived in tents for a year. But during the rainy season, the water would leak through the tents, and it was just not good living. So what we did, we had local purchase authority where I could send my supply sergeant out, and he could purchase what we needed on the local economy in Kuwait. So he did. He went out and bought some of those big, giant blue tarps that you'll find at Walmart or wherever, and we took those blue tarps and put them over the tops of our tents. Problem solved. No rain coming in. Those tarps were $100 a shot. And we had probably a dozen tents for my company to house all of our soldiers. And perfect. No rain coming in. The theater commander came back and said, "Oh, you can't do that because that is covered by a contract. The contractor has to do that. Put tarps over tents." There was a specific contract for that. So he directed me and my company to take those blue canvas tarps off of our tents because we have a contractor that's coming through that will do that for you. Well, again, we're Iowa soldiers, and we took it upon ourselves to solve our situation. Well, lo and behold, we took those tarps off, and in comes the contractor with all their hired people, and they put the same exact brand, everything, blue tarps, back on our tents. They had gone out and purchased them, $100 a pop, remember. But the cost to the United States government for the contractor to do it, $1,000 a tarp. Exactly, disgusting. $1,000 a tarp. We had already spent, about $1,200 putting tarps on our tents, all of our tents for my company. But for this company to do it, $1,000, for a tarp over a tent, something that we had already done for ourselves. So that's just one example. And that was just my company. And on this camp in Kuwait, there were thousands of tents between Camp Arif John and all of the sub-camps where all the soldiers were living. Waste, fraud, abuse, right there. That's just one story, one example. And it was all over the theater. So, whether it's the Ford class carrier, which I'm struggling with right now, or whether it's the F-35, which we've had some issues with, we find these examples time and time again. So the blue tarp example is probably low level. That's lower dollar. You start to get to the Ford class aircraft carrier, you're talking millions and billions of dollars of excess. And those are just a couple examples. Right now, our country, we've gone over $19 trillion in debt. And we have got to get a handle on this, folks. We can start in the DOD, but we must do it in a manner where we're cutting the waste and the abuse and focusing on what will truly make a difference for our young men and women, making sure that they are trained and equipped to the best of our ability. So I just want to close with this. My service as an officer through the United States Army, the Army Reserve, and in the Iowa Army National Guard has provided me very valuable insights throughout the years. And serving in the United States Senate, my decisions are very heavily based upon my own personal experiences, especially when it comes to serving on the Senate Armed Services Committee. I think it's very valuable insight. And we do have a few other members that have recently served as well, and they bring that insight into that committee too. So in the military, we have to remember that we have to care for that man on our left and that man on our right. We are all part of one team. With those discussions and dialogues moving forward, we can find the path that will work for the United States military and also allow us to be as fiscally responsible as possible. That's where we have to go. So we have to defend our country. Again, bottom line, there are a lot of things that government should not do. But defending our nation and our men and women that live here on the homeland is imperative. And that is something that our federal government should do. So let's find a smart way forward, and I'm willing to be an advocate in that area. So again, that's just very basic, but I know we've got a little bit of time for questions. So I just want to thank you very much for allowing me to be here and just give you a little of my background and some of the issues that we have ongoing, but I'm sure we'll have lots of great questions too. So thank you very much. Thank you.
So if you would just wait till I recognize you and then wait for the microphone and just state your name and affiliation, that would be awesome, sir.
Hi, Chuck Willie. I said I'm a doctor in St. Louis. My son's in the backseat of an F-18, 29-year-old Marine aviator, and when he came in through his training, he said, "Dad, you'd be aghast at how inefficient it is." How about a metric to look at? The ratio of people dodging bullets to people supporting them. I think we've got, I mean, I'm not there.
About 1 to 4.
Yeah, can you make it 1 to 3? And is that a strategy? And finally, could you lend about 10% of your courage to Mitch McConnell or take him out?
Thank you. And thanks to your son for his service as well. We rely heavily on those aviators to make sure those of us on the ground in those convoys are safe. So thank you for his service first. There is a tough ratio, and I want to speak to that in just a second. And it will vary depending on the type of unit that's engaged in those frontline activities versus those that are in support roles. So you think about, when you think of the military, you always think about our war fighters. So you'll have your infantrymen, your artillerymen, your armament, all of those folks that are on the front line. And then there are folks like me that are driving those convoys. We have mechanics, all of the support personnel that will enable the folks on the front line. And that is really tough because we do move a lot of equipment. There's a lot of logistics involved in engaging in a war. The ratio is anywhere from, like you said, maybe 1 to 3. I've heard 1 to 4. 1 combat person and then 4 people supporting. So it includes everything from the folks that are fixing the meals in the dining facilities to the nurses that are working in the troop medical clinics. All of those folks are considered support personnel. I don't know, we would need to look at that and maybe see if there's a way that that could be trimmed down a little bit.
I would consider you in Iraq dodging bullets. What about
Oh, yeah.
back here?
Right. Oh, true. Back in the rear, right. Back in the rear, the folks here. And what we do have an issue with, that's a good point, because what we do have an issue with is back here, stateside. If you look at the growth amongst our senior level offices and headquarters groups, there's a lot of people serving in those capacities. You know, we have great folks on the ground, deploying overseas, you know, doing the work that needs to be done to win wars. But in the rear, we do have a lot of personnel. And this is something John McCain has been adamant about, is downsizing our headquarters groups. Because for every billet that's being filled or every position that's being filled in a headquarters group, that's 1 less person that we can have on the ground doing the job that needs to be done. Excellent point. Thank you.
We'll go down front here in the center and then to the lady in the back. So you, sir, yeah. You.
Okay.
Hi, Kevin Miner. Quick,
Hi, Kevin.
kind of a 2-part thing real quick. One is, what are you doing to make sure that my Special Forces brethren that are over there now, still over there, per General Votel, are able to go back in the shadows? And then the second part is, what are you doing on the 810, for the 810s to ensure they stay relevant? Because they pulled my butt out of the fire multiple times.
Thank you. Okay, and you hit a topic that I absolutely love. Thank you. Okay, and thank you so much for your service and for your, you know, all of those that we love to work with, our Special Forces folks. I'll give you a kind of a quick, long answer. Anyway. Just visited Fort Bragg a couple weeks ago. I just missed General Votel. My husband has worked with General Votel in Ranger Regiment. So great man. I think we'll see him going on to CENTCOM. But we have a number of Special Forces groups out there, and one of which I was able to visit while I was at Fort Bragg. Good dear friend of mine from Harlan, Iowa, part of a group at Fort Bragg. My dear friend, in his last trip to Afghanistan, was shot up pretty bad, hit 6 times in his head and down his left side, is missing the lower part of his leg and cannot see from his left eye now. He's back at Fort Bragg. He's still on active duty. You know, these guys are fighters, folks. They are fighters. They endure so much, and they still want to serve. So he'll not go back into action with a group again, but he is serving at an NCO academy out at Fort Bragg and sharing his experiences with others. But our Special Forces groups do very specialized activity out on the front lines, and they are engaging and closing with and destroying the enemy. And so we need to make sure that we are providing them with every advantage possible in order to defeat, whether it's Al-Qaeda, whether it's ISIS, any of those bad guy groups that exist out there. So I have a great affinity for those that serve in special operations. We have a lot of groups out there that do a lot of things that probably a lot of other soldiers don't do. So we need to protect them as best we can, make sure that they are well funded, because these operators are very, very effective in what they do with closing with and destroying the enemy. So making sure that they are funded, making sure that they have all of the men and women necessary for their mission, and addressing the A-10s. And I went to my friend who's in the special operations group, because there was a discussion about A-10s this last year, and I am an adamant supporter of the A-10s, and we have been engaged in many of those discussions. I did a press conference with many of my Senate Armed Services Committee fellow members supporting keeping the A-10, because it is a platform that does support our men on the ground, engaged in battle, provides cover for them. And heavens, I wish we had more A-10s actually out there, covering convoys, covering our special operators. And they are trying to transition those out. But it's the preferred platform for most of our aviators and, of course, the folks on the ground that see the absolute necessity of having them. So that's a battle we'll keep fighting. I'll keep fighting. I'm happy to do that. But thank you very much.